Nothing can happen more beautiful than death. That is a quote from the famous 19th century poet Walt Whitman. My name is Benjamin Bishke, and today we'll be dissecting that and why death is something that we can look forward to rather than something to fear. Now, we'll be going into this from the Christian worldview with the objective to enlighten you to what dualism is, what that means, the implications it has on the afterlife, and then what the meaning of life is from a Christian, non-materialistic perspective. So we begin with the question, what exactly is dualism? Now, dualism from the philosophical perspective is simply this idea that humans are made up of two parts, the body and the soul. So Talifer expands on this a little bit and says, if we are non-physical or immaterial minds or souls or persons who are embodied, then even the complete annihilation of our physical bodies does not entail our annihilation as persons. So what he's saying here is that we have the body, we have the physical, but there's also an immaterial spiritual part of us, that is the soul, or the mind, as some people would say. So dualism is this idea that there's two. It's not just the immaterial, it's not just the physical, there are both. Now, there are some implications of that as it relates to our afterlife. One of these, as Talifer says, if our bodies, even if they're completely annihilated, our souls live on, which means we still live on. So that's the dualist perspective. It's the fact that death is not the end. Now, to bring the Christian perspective in from my worldview, there's two options here as it relates to the afterlife of the non-material, the non-physical. In Matthew 25:47, Jesus is talking. He says, they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. So the idea here is that there's just these two options. You have eternal punishment or eternal life. That is where the non-physical goes, the soul. Louis Berkhoff affirms this in his Introduction to Systematic Theology. He says, there can be no reasonable doubt as to the fact that the Bible teaches the continued existence of the wicked. And I would like to add to this, and likewise the righteous. Clearly here, Jesus and Louis Berkhoff are suggesting that there is something else. There is an eternal afterlife for that immaterial part of us. Now, there are also two main views as it relates to this. One is that our souls are naturally immortal, and the second is that they are some sort of supernaturally sustained. We're not created immortal, but there is that part of us that is sustained to be immortal and to have that eternal either punishment or life. So, in view of that either eternal punishment or eternal life, we have some serious questions to answer in terms of the meaning of life. Now, I'm going to go ahead and argue from an Aristotelian sort of Thomistic lens when it comes to our telos, our teleology. In the Introduction to Christian Philosophy, we read, a reasonable answer to the meaning of life is to be happy. Accordingly, happiness is virtuous activity, successfully living all facets of life well for the purpose of achieving the good, true, and beautiful. Now, Aristotle had this idea that in order to live a fully fulfilled life, he would say the eudaimonia life, which is just a fancy ancient Greek philosophical term for human flourishing, essentially. You must live virtuously. You must exercise the virtues, engage in these essential human activities that involve all these different things. And I think he gets about 90% of the way there. I would say it's a combination of Aristotelian virtue ethics and then this deontology that the Christian ethic can bring into it. So that's exactly what philosopher Thomas Aquinas did. Centuries later, Thomas Aquinas, the medieval philosopher, takes what Aristotle does and he sort of supplements it. He brings this idea that our telos as believers is union with God. So if we have this idea of an afterlife as either eternal punishment or eternal righteousness, eternal life with Jesus, then Aquinas is going to say we should then live with the purpose of union with God to achieve that eternal righteousness. That is the meaning of life, is to live virtuously, to sort of get to that purpose, which is union with God, which is the beatific vision. So, how can we get to this idea that nothing can happen more beautiful than death, as Walt Whitman would say? Because we know that the purpose of life is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. The purpose of life is to have union with the Father. As dualism would argue, life goes so far beyond the physical, so far beyond the material, And we know that there is a spiritual part of this world. We know that there are these two ends, either eternal punishment or eternal life and union with God. We should then live in a way that gets us in relationship with Christ, what we were created to do, who we were created to be. And that is the purpose of this presentation. So if nothing else, it is my hope and prayer that this video would encourage you that we have a God of hope who wants to sustain us, who wants to bring us into eternal relationship with him rather than eternal punishment. Thank you.